Welcome back to J-Thunda's Music Reviews. And for today's video, we're going to be continuing with my long ongoing series where I take a look at my favorite albums from every year. And today's episode is going to be very special because this is actually going to be my favorite year of music ever. I'm of course talking about the year 1973. And I don't even remember which episode this is. Episode 7, I believe, but I'm going all the way back from 1967. So I'll have a playlist down below if you want to catch up on the previous videos. But like I said, for today's video, my favorite year of music is 1973. Has some of my all-time favorite albums from some of my all-time favorite bands. And there's a lot of great debut albums from this year. Overall, if you look at it in totality, 1973 is just a monster year in music, at least in my opinion. I know some people would probably pick maybe like 1967 or 1969, but for me, 1973 is the GOAT. And you'll see why, because a lot of these are some of my all-time favorite albums. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into it because I have a lot of albums to chat about here. So let's first go over some debut albums from 1973. And the first one I'll mention is Queen's debut album, which is just self-titled Queen. Obviously from 1973. And this album is interesting because obviously Queen is one of the most famous rock bands in the world. But at this point, they're kind of, they have some hits, but they're kind of a different band than what they were when they were like super famous. There's a lot of like progressive rock stuff going on here. A lot of like some fantasy elements taking place here. It's not really just, I don't know. Queen's an interesting band. Definitely check out this album. It's got the big hit of Keep Yourself Alive, which is great. But then you've got, like I've said, some fantasy elements. You've got Great King Rat, which is a great song. My Fairy King, which is really good. And then you've got other songs like The Night Comes Down, Modern Times, Rock and Roll. I have a song called Jesus. And then Seven Seas of Rye, which is probably the second most famous song off of this album. But yeah, the Queen's debut album, not their best, obviously, but definitely worth mentioning that this is the year that Queen got their start. Another band that debuts in 1973 is Aerosmith, obviously one of the great American rock bands of the 70s. And yeah, this is their debut album, again, self-titled, just like Queen. You've got the big hit of Dream On, which, a lot of people cite as their best song. One of their best, anyway. But you've also got some other songs like Moving Out, Mama Kin, Walking the Dog. So overall, again, kind of similar with Queen. Not their best album, but it definitely got them on the map, obviously, with Dream On. So definitely worth mentioning here is Aerosmith's debut album. We have another debut album, which actually might be this band's best album, potentially. I don't know, but we have Leonard Skinner's debut album in funny, it's got a funny title because it's literally just called Pronounced Leonard Skinner. Basically just to tell everybody that's how they pronounce their band name. But yeah, this is their debut album. Probably their best album. It's got a lot of great, it's got Tuesday's Gone, Give Me 3 Steps, Simple Man, and if that wasn't good enough, it also ends with Free Bird, obviously one of their best well-known songs. And then I think their next album, which I may or may not talk about in the next episode, has the song Sweet Home Alabama. But this one, definitely a solid debut kind of southern rock album. Probably my favorite Leonard Skinner song is Give Me 3 Steps. I love that song. And then it's even got some pretty cool deep cuts. You've got Mississippi Kid and Poison Whiskey and I Ain't the One. So overall, just a really great debut album. And of course, you obviously have great albums that aren't debut albums, and some of these are actually bands' second or third albums that they've released. I'm of course obviously going to talk about one of my all-time favorite bands, Steely Dan, with Countdown to Ecstasy. Now, to be fair, this isn't one of my absolute favorites by Steely Dan, but it does have some of my all-time favorite Steely Dan songs, such as Razor Boy and Pearl of the Quarter and My Old School. Fantastic songs. And then you've got some songs that I think are like maybe a little bit overrated, but they're definitely fan favorites, Bodhisattva and Showbiz Kids. So definitely worth checking out if you haven't heard this one yet. But yeah, Steely Dan, their sophomore effort, Countdown to Ecstasy. Speaking of sophomore efforts, you have the Eagles' sophomore album, second album, Desperado. And this obviously has some big hits such as Desperado and Tequila Sunrise. Definitely some great songs. Overall, I would say this is an album to listen to from start to finish. Kind of a loose concept album, maybe a little bit. It's definitely leaning more towards the countryside. They are definitely like a country rock southern band, kind of. And this one definitely leads more towards the country, I would say. I'm not a big country fan, but I do tend to like older country a bit more. So this album is definitely very good. Like I said, you do have Desperado and Tequila Sunrise, but you also have Outlaw Man, Doolin Dalton, Out of Control. You've got it's just a great album to listen to from start to finish. So definitely check this one out if you've only really heard the Eagles' like big hits. You've also got quite possibly ZZ Top's best record of Tres Hombres, and obviously you've got the big hit of LaGrange, one of my favorites, but you've also got Waiting for the Bus, Jesus Just Left Chicago, Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers. You know, you've got a lot of great stuff on this album. And maybe, you know, there's an album that they have in the 80s that I think rivals this one, but still, this is a fantastic album from 1973 nonetheless. You also have the album that really put Billy Joel on the map. This is not his debut album. His debut album actually came out, I think, in 1971 with like one or two like great songs, but overall, it was just an okay album. This album is definitely, like I said, the one that put him on the map, and it is, of course, Piano Man, obviously with the big mega hit of Piano Man, definitely one of his most well-known songs, but a lot of cool deep cuts on here as well, like Traveling Prayer, Ain't No Crime, You're My Home, one of my favorites, The Ballad of Billy the Kid, and Captain Jack. There's a lot of great songs on this album. Definitely worth checking out if you've only really heard Piano Man. Not one of my all-time favorite Billy Joel albums. We'll get to that later on in the 70s. Hint, hint. But still a great album. Not a debut album, but the one that put him on the map. We also have Band on the Run by Paul McCartney and Wings. This is the band that he basically created after the Beatles broke up. And definitely, this is kind of the only album I've really listened to by Wings, if I'm being honest. But it has a lot of great songs. Obviously, the title track of Band on the Run is a classic. But you've got songs like Jet and Mrs. Vanderbilt, Let Me Roll With It, and 1985. And then you've got some other songs as well. But yeah, it's a fantastic album. I'm not sure, actually, if it's their debut album. Let me check that. It is not their debut album, but definitely one of their best well, actually, I don't know, because I've only listened to one of them, but probably a band that I should check out more. But as far as I know, this is definitely their most popular album. Yeah, fantastic songs. And I actually got to see Paul McCartney live, and he played a lot of the songs from this album specifically, so that was a lot of fun. We also have Paul Simon's, I think, second solo album, obviously after Simon and Garfunkel. There Goes Rhymin' Simon. This is definitely one of my favorites by him. It's got some of my personal favorites by him of Kodachrome, love it. Take Me to the Mardi Gras, Saint Judy's Comet, Love Me Like a Rock, Tenderness, Something So Right. Like it's just chock full of great songs. If you haven't listened to a lot of Paul Simon, I would say this is definitely the album to listen to first, because it's just got a lot of great songs, a lot of diverse songs on here. So definitely check it out if you haven't already. There Goes Simon, of course, There Goes Rhymin' Simon by Paul Simon. So we also have another album by another one of my all-time favorite bands, Deep Purple, and that would be Who Do We Think We Are, which is actually my favorite Deep Purple album of all time. If you haven't seen episode of 1972, definitely one of my favorites from that year was Machine Head, but that's actually my second favorite Deep Purple album. This is my favorite, probably an unpopular opinion. Probably most Deep Purple fans would go with Machine Head or, Burn or Fireball or whatever. But this is actually my favorite. I think it's one of the most underrated rock albums ever. Really, it only has one song that some people would know, Woman from Tokyo, which is a fantastic song. But all of the rest of the album is fantastic. There are definitely a lot of sleepers and deep cuts. Some of my all-time favorite Deep Purple tracks. Mary Long is a lot of fun. Super Trooper is fantastic. Smooth the Dancer and Rat Bat Blue. Really great drum songs, too, on this album. And then Place in Line and Our Lady. Just a really underrated rock gem, I think. Definitely one of my favorites from 1973. I know a lot of people would probably pick Machine Head as their best album, but for me, this is definitely their best album. Also, I mentioned in 1972, Led Zeppelin did not release an album, but for 1973, they definitely did. It's not my favorite album from the year, though, so if you were wondering, Led Zeppelin did release an album this year. Not my favorite, though, but I still love it nonetheless. And that would be, of course, be Houses of the Holy. This is actually my second favorite Led Zeppelin album in totality. Led Zeppelin 4, my favorite, but Houses of the Holy is a close second. It's so good. I love the diversity of genres that are on this album. You, of course, start out with the hard rock hitting, The Song Remains the Same, and which transitions beautifully into the Rain Song, which is kind of more like a soft, ballady kind of song. And then Over the Hills and Far Away is just like a majestic rock song. And then the Crunge, which I know a lot of people don't like. I love it. It's just kind of a weird little funky tune. I really like it. Then you got Dancing Days, just a solid rock song. And then Do You Make Her, kind of like their reggae-inspired song. And then No Quarter, kind of like the doom and gloom, kind of proggy song. One of my favorites. And then just my favorite Led Zeppelin song of all time, The Ocean. So really just a fantastic album from start to finish. My second favorite Led Zeppelin album, but not my favorite album from 1973. What will it be? And then we only have 3 more albums to talk about. 2 of these albums are by the same artist. They actually released 2 fantastic albums in 1973. I'm of course talking about Elton John, and probably my second favorite album that he ever did, and my second favorite from 1973 would be Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. Fantastic album. It's got a couple hit songs that you might know. Obviously, Crocodile Rock, probably his most famous from this album, but it also has Daniel. But really, of course, like with most albums, if you know my channel, it's the deep cuts. You've got Teacher, I Need You, Elderberry Wine, which is one of my favorites, Blues for Baby and Me, Midnight Creeper, Have Mercy on the Criminal, fantastic song, Texan Love Song, High Flying Bird, Screw You, Young Man Blues is fantastic. And then a couple of songs on the extended edition. You've got Jackrabbit and Skyline Pigeon, which Skyline Pigeon I think was one of his older songs that he re-released. But overall, just a fantastic album. Probably my second favorite overall. But of course, my favorite Elton John album ever. And probably an album that I would put in my top 5 records of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Definitely my favorite double album of all time, and definitely my favorite Elton John album of all time from 1973. Like I mentioned, it's a double album, and it's rare to get an album with so many songs that are just so fantastic and really hard to pick like a least favorite song off of. Like I said, it's my 5th favorite album of any artist. And of course, you've got the big mega hits of Candle in the Wind, Benny and the Jets, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting, but again, it's the deep cuts. It starts out with like an 11-minute epic song, which Elton John does not do a lot of. But Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding, one of the best opening tracks to any album. And then you've got This Song Has No Title, Gray Seal, which I mentioned on his 1970 album, just his self-titled album, Elton John. He actually re-released that on this one. I think I like this version a bit more, actually. And then you got Jamaica Jerk Off, which kind of has a reggae vibe to it. I've seen that movie too, and Sweet Painted Lady are some of his best deep cuts ever on any album. And then The Ballad of Danny Bailey, Dirty Little Girl, All the Girls Love Alice, Your Sister Can't Twist, but She Can Rock and Roll is a lot of fun. Roy Rogers, Social Disease and Harmony. Just, I could go on all day about this album. Definitely my favorite double album of all time. Definitely my favorite Elton John album of all time. And overall, just my second favorite album from 1973. It's probably not going to be that hard to figure out what my favorite from the year is. I'm, of course, referring to Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. I already did my ranking of every Pink Floyd studio album, so if you've seen that, you know that Dark Side of the Moon is my favorite Pink Floyd album of all time. And overall, my second favorite album of all time, just behind Led Zeppelin 4. I love this album. When I first listened to it, I just got so obsessed with it. I just had to keep listening to it and listening to it. It's an album that's just so rewarding to listen to from start to finish. You know, with a lot of great albums, you know, you can kind of just pick and choose songs to listen to. But for this one, I think it's just more rewarding to listen to from start to finish. That's kind of how I feel about most Pink Floyd albums, to be honest. But yeah, there's just something special about this album. It's obviously one of the best selling albums of all time. People love this album for a good reason. And yeah, this is definitely one of the main reasons why 1973 is my favorite year of music, because it's got my second favorite album of all time. And then obviously, just like I mentioned with all of these albums, they're so good. A lot of emerging artists start off in this year, and just a lot of artists in general are making some of their best albums ever. So yeah, Dark Side of the Moon, my favorite from 1973. All right, so those are my favorite albums from my favorite year of music, 1973. And definitely comment down below, what is your favorite year of music, if you had to think about it. 73, I'm pretty sure it's a safe bet. It's my favorite year. It's got some of my all-time favorite albums, and just in total, just a lot of fantastic, you know, debut albums, or just albums that are like the best by some artists. And just to do a quick recap, you got Countdown to Ecstasy by Steely Dan. You got Queen's debut album, Aerosmith's debut album, Leonard Skinner's debut album. You've got Desperado by the Eagles, Tres Hombres by ZZ Top, There Goes Rhymin' Simon by Paul Simon, Piano Man by Billy Joel, Band on the Run by Wings, two Elton John albums, Don't Shoot Me, I'm the Piano Player, and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Who Do We Think We Are, which I think is one of the most underrated rock albums ever. Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, and then ultimately my favorite album from the year, Dark Side of the Moon. So definitely let me know if you agree with my picks here, and definitely let me know what are your favorite albums for the year, 1973. Comment all of that lovely stuff down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe and all that jazz, and I'll see you in the next video. Next week, I'll talk about my favorite albums from the year 1974. It's definitely going to be a bit less than 1973, because there's just so much to talk about in 1973. But yeah, this has been a fun series. Definitely let me know if you guys are enjoying it, and I'm definitely planning on continuing it. And yeah, see you in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a fantastic day.